Hey there, my name's Justin. I'm one of the pastors at Hope City. I'm really glad you're checking out this week's message. I hope you'll take a minute, look around our website, visit our YouTube channel, and download the Hope City app by searching Hope City Indy in the App Store or Google Play Store. There's great content on the app that goes far beyond weekend services. Hope City is a place where you can belong before you believe. No matter where you come from today spiritually, I hope this message helps you find hope and move closer to Jesus. Enjoy the message.
Hello, Hope City. So good to be with you. Happy Mother's Day. I am so just happy and thrilled to be here. I have loved watching Justin and Trish from afar and been so inspired by the ways that they lead, just really from brokenness. And it's just such an example to me of Jesus and the way that he led people. So thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be with you this morning. The older I get, the more and more I realize what a precious gift time is. And so for some of you, you're like, well, I didn't know you were going to be here today, so don't waste my time, and I'm going to not waste your time, all right? I promise that I hope to not waste your time. If I do, just don't let me know, don't run out. That'll be awkward. But I'm excited to be with you today. I know that Mother's Day hosts so many emotions, and so whether you're celebrating or grieving or this day is filled with tension for you, I want you to know that this is a place that we can hold all of those emotions, and I think today we'll be encouraged no matter where we sit, no matter what our title is, no matter how we are celebrating Mother's Day. This past year, I picked up a host of new hobbies, if you will, as I'm sure so many of you did while maybe you were in your home or just spending more time alone than you ever did, or maybe with a ton of little people in your house all the time, don't know. For me, at the very top of the weird hobbies that I picked up, well, weird for me, not weird for many people, was I got into Marvel Universe. Okay, some of you, yes, already were like down the road and you were like, yeah, like welcome to the party, So for me, I'm not really like a fantasy sci-fi type gal. That's been my husband's role in our family and relationship. And then all of a sudden with Marvel, it was like, wow, life is just a little bit crazy. I think I need to watch something crazier to get into. And so I was the target market, I think, for the new series WandaVision. For those of you who maybe got into that, I see some head nods. Yes, don't worry, I'm not going to go too far in the weeds if you're not into it. But I was like the perfect person for that because I get sucked into trends. And so it was a really trendy, like new poppy show. And I was like, yeah, all right, Disney Plus, I see this. And then I told all my friends who were into Marvel, like, I'm watching Marvel now, like I'm one of you. And they were like, no, stop. You got to go back to the origin stories. Like, what are you doing? You're a loser, And so I went back and we didn't watch all 21, but we watched several. And I discovered the thing that all of you who are into Marvel or even just into stories already know. And that is that while the fight scenes and the end are so fun, they're really nothing without the beginning. Right? They're really nothing without the origin story of how people came to be, who they are, who their families are, what brokenness they come from. And today, I want to dive into a story that I think often the origins get a little bit missed, a little bit glossed over so that we get to the exciting, crazy scenes. But the origin story, I think, is so powerful. I don't know if those of you who are into movies saw the movie Gods and Kings several years ago, really just surveying the life of Moses. And what I really didn't like about that movie, just to be completely frank with you, was, two things. The first was like Moses was like super attractive and Pharaoh was like semi-attractive, and that just wasn't how I saw it going in my head. It was like the classic, like read the book before you see the movie problem. Like I was like, I don't think that's what they're supposed to look like. And then the second, though, was that it started when he was grown. Like it missed the beginning, the power of the beginning. The movie started when Moses had grown up, which missed his origin story and the very significant characters that brought his life into the world. See, I think one of the biggest myths about the Bible and about the people in the Bible is that they're these really tidy bow type stories. They're these powerful stories of people who've just always had it together, confident, full of the answers, when really what's really true is that the Bible meets us in the world we actually live in, full of mess, flaws of heroes, the power of God working through broken people. And I believe the Bible paints a very compelling picture in Moses' origin story of what it looks like to be very, very brave when your story feels very, very small and the cards seem stacked against you. See, hiding in Moses' origin story are the stories of not one, but 5 women who brought his life into existence and helped sustain it. 2 midwives, his mother, his sister, and Pharaoh's own daughter. And today, I want to focus on the story of 2 midwives named Shiphrah and Puah. Not Puah from The Lion King, Puah from Exodus 1. It'd be weird, Timon and Puah, yeah. This isn't going to be some sanitized Mother's Day version of this story. I'm also not going to go off the rails and talk about the details of childbirth, so nobody freak out. My hope is that in our passage today, we'll see just how much God loves people, how our limits are actually invitations to join him in his mission, and that we have no one and nothing to fear. So if you have your Bible, turn to Exodus 1. If not, we'll have it on the screen for you. But I want to start out in Exodus 1, verse 8. Eventually, a new king came to power in Egypt who knew nothing about Joseph or what he had done. He said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel now outnumber us and are stronger than we are. We must make a plan to keep them from growing even more. If we don't, and if war breaks out, they will join our enemies and fight against us. Then they will escape from the country." So the Egyptians made the Israelites their slaves. They appointed slave drivers over them, hoping to wear them down with crushing labor. They forced them to build cities of Pithom and Ramses as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more the Israelites multiplied and spread. And the more alarmed the Egyptians became. So the Egyptians worked the people of Israel without mercy. They made their lives bitter, forcing them to mix mortar and make bricks and do all the work in the fields. They were ruthless in all their demands. Some of you are like, wow, this is kind of a dark Mother's Day, you know? This story is really powerful and really complicated. See, just to set the scene, this is textbook oppression. Pharaoh is doing the classic things throughout history that people do when they want to make a subset of a population seem subhuman. In verses 9 through 10 of chapter 1, he's trying to put his people into a panic, telling them that if the Hebrews continue to multiply like they're doing, they are going to have less. He's building scarcity into the community with his words. He's riling them up. And then he moves to oppression and physical force. He ruthlessly makes the people of Israel work as slaves, robbing people of their dignity, making them work in inhumane conditions. And then in verses 15 through 17, after he's shared the words that will scare and gone to physical oppression, he turns to dark and quiet deceit. Let's read in verses 15 through 17. Then Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, gave this order to the Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah. "When you help the Hebrew women as they give birth, watch as they deliver. If the baby is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." But because the midwives feared God, they refused to obey the king's orders. They allowed the boys to live too. Now, this is a really messy story, and we should pause, if we didn't already, to ask a couple questions here. See, the Bible invites us to be curious and ask questions of the scene, and so we got to stop and ask a couple questions, because this is pretty weird, right? See, why baby boys and not baby girls? Well, because daughters were not a threat to Pharaoh. They could be used and sold, and so in his mind, they caused no threat, no trouble to him at all. Women were viewed a step below cattle. Women could be traded. You could always trade your daughter for cattle or weapons or things to make your house stronger. And so women are seen here in a very real way as subhuman, not really worthy of men. And you see this in Pharaoh's dismissal of them. But also, the infant mortality rates in this time were really high. Babies died during childbirth a lot. And so Pharaoh's approach to kill the Hebrew boys is to make it look like an accident that couldn't be traced back to him. Because, hey, it's just what happens. So Shiphrah and Puah, while they did not birth the hundreds and thousands of Hebrew babies on their own, they surely had other midwives with them. They are the two that Scripture mentions, and likely the ones who had to interact with Pharaoh. He had the power of life and death in his hand, and this is really important to remember as we read and think about this story, because what they did was civil disobedience, not just to preserve the life of babies, but that they were willing to do, and they might die for doing it. They were putting their own lives on the line. And so remember how I told you that Pharaoh underestimated them. Let's keep reading in verses 18 through 22. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. "Why have you allowed the boys to live?" "The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women," the midwives replied. "They are more vigorous and have their babies so quickly that we cannot get there in time." If you're wondering, they are making up a little fib. So God was good to the midwives, and the Israelites continued to multiply, growing more and more powerful. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all of his people: "Throw every newborn Hebrew boy into the Nile River, but you may let the girls live." You may let the girls live. So first, I just already know that those of you who are rule followers in the room are having some severe internal tension. Because you're like, wait, did they just lie? Is this what? That's wrong. They shouldn't be lying no matter what. And it's complicated, right? Is this okay? Is this fib all right? Is it okay to lie? It's true, they're lying. And it's also true that God did not smite them for it, that he did not punish them for it, but that he rewarded them. So what's up with this? What's going on here? Is lying not wrong? Well, no, I think it's because there's something very important about any time that we want to make a very hard decision. And that is, we can't just be concerned with our actions, but also our motives. Our motives and our actions make up a decision together. They're not divorced from one another. We can have, you and I know this, the right motives in a conversation, but it can unintentionally harm the other person, right? So no matter what we meant by something, if our action harmed them, it was still wrong. Or the reverse, we can do the right thing and we can do the right things, but if we've got bad motives like self-preservation or wanting to get ahead or wanting to use other people in some way, we can do the right thing, but with the wrong intentions, it's wrong. Our motives and our actions make up our decisions, not just one or the other. And so for the midwives, here in Exodus 1, they had the right motives, and therefore that led them to the right actions, that they wanted to preserve life and honor God over man. If they would have let Pharaoh kill the babies, their motives would have been to please Pharaoh over God. And so there's another complicated piece to this, because the truth is that we don't know why Shiphrah and Puah were midwives. Many scholars believe during this time that many midwives were usually unmarried women or married without children due to infertility of some kind. And so while the text leads us to believe that then it tells us God gave them families and children of their own to raise, they likely were not mothers by title before this. So no matter what their circumstances were behind why they were midwives, I'm guessing at times, based on their own social status, they felt limited and sometimes scared. Their story moves me because when I'm honest, there are times I feel limited. Right? Like all of us have experienced limitation in some way, whether it's a physical limit in our own body that we experience, or a relationship or an emotional limit, a relationship gone sideways, or something that I hoped would happen that didn't happen on the exact timeline I wanted to. This last year has felt like a giant limitation at best. And I wonder how you would define your current limitations. The thing that feels like it keeps good things from happening or makes miracles impossible. Your finances, your family dynamics, a difficult boss, a difficult teacher, a physical illness, a fractured relationship or marriage, or even just a boring job or a boring class. And how if you brought those things to God and said, I don't see this like you do, and I'm not just going to ask you to fix it or remove it or take it away, but actually ask him, what about this do you want to use that I cannot see? How can you redeem this thing in ways that I can't even imagine? And I say this because Shiphrah and Puah did not see their limitations as midwives as limits, and they very well could have. Our limitations are not barriers for God to work, they are invitations to join him in his mission. But we often think we've got to have the right circumstances, the right financial situation, the right house, the right family before we can come to God. And God says, no, I want you in your mess. It is because of your mess that I am going to use you and show my power. And so the beautiful truth is that God doesn't see our limitations as barriers, but as invitations to lay down our lives, every bit of who we are, and just say, Jesus, here is the sum of who I am. Here is what I have. How do you want to use me? There's something interesting in this story that strikes me, that Pharaoh underestimated the deep connection that the midwives would have had with the women they served. Like, he actually thought that a midwife could care for a woman for 7 to 8 months, feel life moving inside of her, give her advice on the aches and the pains of the dreaded third trimester, and feel the toes kick, and that then when it was time to deliver, they would fear him more than they feared God and the life they felt itself. He underestimated how their compassion, their quiet bravery, their sense of justice would be a threat to his power. And don't we know so many people that are underestimated for the same reasons today? See, the fact that the Hebrew midwives are in this story means that a baby named Moses came safely into this world. And if you follow this story, you know that because Moses lived through childbirth, his mother placed him in a basket on the Nile with his sister watching, and Pharaoh's own daughter comes down to find him, had compassion on him, rescued him. I would venture to say Pharaoh gravely underestimated the power of compassion and the role of women in this story. And so this story is dark. And in the midst of this darkness, these two very unassuming servants, midwives, pushed back darkness and chose life and love. So you remember that part about midwives and how women usually become midwives? They likely did not have children they were raising, and in that culture, that would have been a really big deal. See, I find this little part, even though it seems so small, so powerful, because it represents this truth that we also find on the New Testament. See, in the Old Testament, the command so often was be fruitful and multiply, and that meant literally. But then after Jesus comes, he invites everyone into the mission, go and make disciples. This isn't just for the parents in the room. We can choose selfless love for the sake of others at every season of our lives, no matter how old, no matter how young, married or single. And our importance to the church and to our communities is not dependent upon our marital status or parenthood. This is what God invites you and I into every day. And don't you think that our world is craving this kind of real, nurturing, sacrificial love from those who follow Jesus? In every area of our lives, God invites you and I to push back darkness and nurture life. We see so clearly here that the midwives had appropriately placed fear on the only one who deserved their trust, and that was God. They gave the excuse that the Hebrew women were stronger. I just love that little snarky part that they're just like, oh, they're just stronger and it's just faster. I don't know, Pharaoh, And they feared God more than him. So if you live in the same world that I do over this last year, when we talk about fear, it's like, yeah, well, the thing is, Anne, there's a lot to be afraid of, and I would agree with you. This last year has been a little bit of a doozy, and there is a lot to be afraid of. I can't go a day without feeling that low tremor of anxiety of what is around the corner, what is next, and I feel like all of us in this entire country or just kind of in world are coming out of this hole of the last PTSD of the year of like, I am afraid and I am scared. And the Bible talks a lot about this too. In Psalm 118, verse 6, the author writes, I called to the Lord in distress. The Lord answered me and put me in a spacious place. The Lord is for me. I will not be afraid. And then the author asks this question: what can a mere person do to me? Now, I don't know what your personality is like, but I am a little snarky. And so when I read the Bible sometimes, I'm like, well, a person can do a lot, Lord. Like, I'm afraid of people, People can do a lot of harm, but the writer is saying there's nothing people can do that can get in the way of who God is and what he has for your life. And you might not think that you can relate to the circumstances of two midwives in Exodus 1, but we have all been faced or will face a choice to fear God or fear man in our lives, probably multiple times. Whether it's misrepresenting the truth, being silent when you know you should speak up or act on behalf of someone else, being stingy with resources or being generous, being honest about something that you know there could be consequences for, but the truth is more worthy of your fear. Offering to serve and help someone with no promise that it's even going to go well or that you'll ever be recognized for it. Parenting children through their hardest years or months, wanting to throw in the towel when life gets hard, but instead continuing to forgive and press on. All of these are places where we can push back darkness in the small, little, ordinary moments every day and choose love no matter the cost. And I think we can do these things because, like Shiphrah and Puah, we have nothing and no one to fear but God himself. And their civil disobedience was not just about saving the babies' lives, but what makes it so significant is that they were willing to die so that they could live. They didn't obey Pharaoh's order, but chose to love their community instead, no matter what. Love, embodied, fearless, unselfish, radical. This is a crazy, powerful story. I have a mentor that often tells me a value isn't really a value to you until it costs you something. A lot of us like to say the things that we value, but we've felt the sting of when we've had a moment to choose whether or not that was really a value or if we'd choose our own selfish motives instead. And this is what Jesus did for us. He was willing to put down his life, willingly give it, so that we would have nothing to fear, not just in this life, but in life for eternity. And so we're not afraid of what man can do to us because we are too in awe of who God is, what Jesus did for us. And Shiphrah and Puah's selfless, fearless, radical love is just a glimpse of the cross-like love that Jesus gave to us and called us to live out the same kind of love. See, I don't know about you, but I often find that in Christian worlds, we often think of love as like, oh, love, like that's, give me something bigger, give me something loftier. But I think love is like Christianity 101 and Christianity PhD. Like, we think we know how to love until someone wrongs us. And then, I don't know about you, but my garbage self does not want to love. Or we think we know how to love until someone tests us in our own home beyond our limits, and we just can't imagine choosing love and sacrifice another day. But all of us, no matter our limits or our circumstances, are invited to join God in his mission to redeem what's been broken, push against the darkness with Jesus' way of love and light that looks like nothing else. And so for me, as I read this story here on Mother's Day, if mothering is just to nurture, influence, disciple, and sacrifice for at its core, in a way, we are all invited into that. And I can't picture two more influential spiritual mothers than these two who helped bring and keep Moses alive at risk of losing their own life. And so as we think about this story, I just want to leave us with 3 questions to reflect on this week. And the first is there any area of my life where I fear man more than God? Is there any area of my life where man's word is more powerful than God's? This could even be what you need acceptance of, choosing to gossip about a person instead of honor them in front of somebody. What you choose to do and say and how you live at work, even if you know you'll be looked down on for it. Secondly, whose lives am I called to love and fight for in my home, community, and church? Like, whose lives have already been placed in front of you? You don't have to go out running into the streets saying, I'm ready to love you, like, whose lives has God already brought into your life or bringing into your life that he has asked you to, no matter what, love, fight for, not give up on? And then the third, what does cross-like love require of me right now? In other words, what is your midwife assignment? What has God calls you to that feels hard and messy and maybe even a little bit ordinary? Not grand like the very end of the movie, but in the small little beginning that just feels like sacrifice over and over, because entire communities around us in this city, in this place, are waiting to live based on what we do, are waiting to be seen based on how we love, how we join God in his work, what we sacrifice, what we give up. And you and I, we cannot put this off on the elites and the pastors and the ministers. It is the call of every person who chooses to follow the way of Jesus to love people with a way that does not make sense. I love the way Flannery O'Connor says it, may I come to know the truth, and may the truth make me odd. Like, what kind of odd love is God calling you into? Because we cannot give him glory and praise on Sunday and then choose our own selfish motives on Monday. We have to choose in every area of our lives, especially in the ones that feel so limited and so scary and so costly, to choose life and to choose love for other people at a cost to ourselves. And the way of Jesus will always look like love at a cost to ourselves for the sake of the other person. And it is not easy, it is hard. But I think our world is desperate for this kind of love. From ordinary people like you and me, from mothers and fathers, spiritually in the church, not just literal. But women like Shifra and Pua who said, I know my limits, I know, but I am going to follow God. I'm going to fear him instead of man, even if that means I could die. So let me pray for us as we consider what our cross-like love assignment is. Jesus, thank you for this radical way that you have called us into, even when it feels hard. God, I thank you for this tiny little story in Exodus 1 of these powerful, compassionate women who chose life and surrender, even when it could have meant death for them. God, I don't know the stories in this room, but I know that all of us are probably facing a love that feels very hard and costly. God, maybe today on Mother's Day, that feels even harder for some reason. Or maybe for the moms in the room, as we reflect on this last year and what it has meant, God, that you would just give us the strength and the courage to remember it is worth it. And God, for all of us to be reminded of the sacrificial love that you have called us into. And that no matter what our limits are, no matter what our circumstances are, you want to redeem the broken spaces in our homes and our communities through us. Thank you for choosing us. It's in your name I pray. Amen.